Shalom everyone, and welcome to our weekly Soul of the Parsha class. This Shabbat we're going to be reading the Parasha Bemidbar. It's really the first Parasha of a new book, the fourth book within the 5 books of Moses. The book is called, in Hebrew, it's called Chumash Bemidbar, which literally means in the desert. In English, it's called the Book of Numbers. That's how it was traditionally called. There's actually a reason why it was called the Book of Numbers. That the reason is that the book and this parsha begins with a census of the Jewish people. The Torah has been given, and now they're in the desert, and they're beginning the main part of their journey towards the land of Canaan, soon to be, or in the future to be, the land of Israel. And before this whole journey starts, there is a census. They're counted. And the list is actually given twice. First in the very beginning in chapter 1, and then again in chapter 2, the list is again repeated of all the numbers of all the tribes. Now, when we open the Zohar of this parasha, the Zohar that's around this parasha, we see a very interesting idea that's going to be the starting point of our meditation, or what we want to concentrate on today. So the Zohar starts with the beginning of the creation of the world, and how the world was stood, but then was collapsed, so to speak, by the primal sin, the original sin of Adam and Eve, and then it stood up with the third son of Adam and Eve, Seth, and then again it collapsed because of other sins. And then Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they all made it stood, but it was never fully stable. The world wasn't stable until the giving of the Torah and the building of the tabernacle. So then the Zohar says, after the Torah was given and the instructions were given, and the tabernacle was built, then Hashem, God, decided to make a census to count all of his soldiers. So this is an expression, an idiom that doesn't appear in the Torah itself. This is a Zohar image or symbol that the Jewish people, the Israelites, are referred to as soldiers, and the census is like the commander, the officer-in-chief, gathering all of his soldiers and counting them to see what he has, what power he has to conquer the world with, or in a good way. And then the Zohar says something even more interesting. The Zohar speaks about 2 kinds of soldiers, 2 types of soldiers. And that's what we want to focus on today. What are the 2 types of soldiers? The first type of soldier, are soldiers of the Torah, Chayalin de'oraita. The second type of soldier is soldiers of the tabernacle, Chayalin de'mishkena. So we have Chayalin de'oraita, soldiers of the Torah, and Chayalin de'mishkena, soldiers of the tabernacle. So now this is interesting. The whole idea of soldiers is something interesting to look at, and the division into 2 types of soldiers is another very interesting thing. So let's start with what does the image of a soldier add to our understanding of the census in the beginning of this parsha. So really what it adds is that a soldier, by definition, he's taking an oath, every soldier, that if it comes to this, he's willing to sacrifice his life. That is, a soldier is someone who goes all the way. And when you're willing to sacrifice your life for something, it means you're connected to the highest level, the highest point, the innermost point of your soul, of who you are. And in that point, that's the only way anyone can sacrifice their lives is if they're connected to something that's higher than their life, which is a value, a belief, a connection, a bond that they have deep within them that's more precious than their own lives, because it gives their lives meaning. If the meaning of your life is just the fact that you're alive and other things that come through this, by virtue of being alive, you're able to enjoy food and drink and travel, whatever it is, then the purpose of your life isn't something transcendent. It's something immanent. It's within your grasp. But if what gives meaning to your life is something higher, then it comes across as the ability to sacrifice your life, to to do mesirut nefesh, as we say in Hebrew. So the idea of now the Zohar is teaching us that when we're reading the census, it's very boring, it's a lot of numbers, but really what we should be having in mind is it reminds us that if we want to go for something all the way, or in this case to be connected to God, to be connected to the surface of God in this world, to be connected to something really high and spiritual, we have to think of ourselves, among other things, we can think of ourselves as children of God, we can think of ourselves as the wife of God, each and every one of us, and collectively also as the wife, the spouse of God. It's more intimate. And there is something else also, which is like a soldier. A soldier it's not like a son or like a spouse. It sounds more distant, but in a way, there's something about the soldier that is intimately connected with the king, let's say, who's sending him to the war, even more than a son or a spouse, because he's willing to do everything for his king, for the one who's sending him into this battle. So in a way, there's something, the love of a soldier, of an emissary, to whoever sends him. You can think about Chabad emissaries all over the world, and they were able to do this mesirut nefesh, going all the way to another country and building a Chabad house and dedicating their lives to it, all of their lives to it sometimes. This can only come from an immense, deep love for their Rebbe. So they think of themselves as soldiers. It's well known that Lubavitcher Rebbe called his emissaries soldiers, and that's why the youth movement is called Tzivot Hashem, armies of God, and he called the Mivtzaim, what's the word for Mivtza? Operation, like a military operation, to go out and put on tefillin to people and to give people mezuzah. It's like a military operation, and you talk about mitzvah tank and all this imagery. It wasn't because he was a militaristic type. He wasn't a militaristic type at all. But it's because he wanted to evoke a kind of devotion that we see in armies, in soldiers. So that's just generally the fact that this whole census thing is now connected to the idea of soldiers. So that's one thing. Now, what is this definition or distinction, separation between the soldiers of the Torah, Chayalin de Oraita, and soldiers of the tabernacle, Chayalin de Mishkana? So first we'll say that it was a Hagra, the Vilna Gaon. He has an interpretation of the Zohar, and he said something which will be very meaningful for us. He said that where's the Zohar taking this from? That there are two types of soldiers. It's not written anywhere. He says the Zohar learns this from the fact that the census is listed twice. It was one census, but it's listed twice. So that evokes or suggests that there were two things going on here. It was one census, but it was two types of soldiers. It also suggests that really all of the soldiers are both, because it's one census, it's the same number of people. If they're listed twice, and one corresponds to this idea of a Torah soldier and the other one of a tabernacle soldier, it suggests that all of us are both. But first we have to understand what they mean separately, and we have to think of ourselves or people we know maybe as belonging more to one group and less to another group, and then we can think about them as really complementary, as something we want to contain within each one of us. So what really helps here are two terms that were used in Chabad very much. Chabad would traditionally characterize certain types of Hasidim as belonging to one of two groups. And the first category was the maskil. The maskil is the intellectual Hasid. The maskil is someone whose main focus, the center of gravity for what he's doing, is Torah study. And in Chabad, Torah study isn't just learning the Gemara all day or Jewish law. It's primarily learning the inner, deeper secrets of the Torah, the Hasidic level of the Torah, which is really based on Kabbalah. So learning all of this it's a kind of spiritual intellectual. It's not an academic intellectual. It's not a regular yeshiva rabbi intellectual whose study centers around Jewish law. It's a divine Hasidic intellectual who wants to understand the deep concepts of Hasidut, focus on them, carry them in their head, and it really gives him more and more of a grasp of what godliness is like, what Hashem is like, how He's operating in the world, how is the soul constructed, and all of this he puts together in his head, and he's walking on. He's like a soldier of the Torah. He's a soldier because he's giving it his all. He's going deeper and deeper, and some of the maskidim could be so into their meditation, their study, they wouldn't notice things that are going on around them, and because they were so they invested in what they were learning. So in a way, the Chabad maskil type corresponds or gives us a good description of what it means to be a soldier of the Torah. He's like a soldier. It's like a battle, but it's something very spiritual. There's no real enemy here. It's like the Peace Corps, right? Peace Corps is like an army, a peacetime army. It's not an army that fights an enemy. It's an army that goes and conquers new lands, and conquers new territories, mental, spiritual territories, trying to gather them and understand them and build them one by one in their head. So that's the soldier of the Torah, the maskil. The other type Chabad described Hasidim as belonging to is the oived. The oived is, the maskil is the intellectual, the oived is literally it means worker. Someone who is doing work. What kind of work do we mean? Just like the maskil isn't the academic intellectual, so is the oived not a physical manual laborer, although that's a wonderful thing. But in Hasidus, the oived is someone who's doing inner work. He's working on his emotional attributes, on his midot. He's trying to cultivate within him really a tabernacle. So the oived is the soldier of the tabernacle. This is a war with an enemy, the enemy being the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, all the different, with all its different branches. It's the different negative inclinations within us that we have to overcome, and we're trying to turn our heart into a tabernacle, just as the injunction to build a tabernacle used the words, build me a tabernacle, and they shall build me a tabernacle, and I shall reside within them. It should have said reside within it, but it says reside within them, because really each and every one of us has to turn his heart into a tabernacle. Tabernacle in Hebrew is called Mishkan. It's a place where something resides, where the divine presence wishes to reside. It's up to us if God resides in our hearts or He doesn't. We have to turn our hearts into tabernacles. So this is the second type of soldier. The tabernacle soldier, Chayalin de Mishkana, are those whose primary focus, whose primary work is to turn their hearts into tabernacles. So again, we have two types of soldiers. We have two types of classic Chabad Hasidim, and again, it doesn't only apply to Chabad, right? Chabad used this because Chabad had a lot of the first type. All of the Hasidim are oived. They're doing their avodah. They're doing their work, their inner work. This is what Hasidut is all about. Is not to just study something intellectually. It's to turn it, to implement it, to let it filter and enter our hearts and become something very real and alive that changes who we are and how we act in the world. So all the Hasidim are oivdim, workers. They're doing inner work. But Chabad in particular, because Chabad stands for Chokhmah, Bina, Dat, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, the intellectual faculties, Chabad put a strong emphasis on deep inner Hasidus study. So they had this type of the maskil more maybe than other Hasidim. So the distinction is made, but of course it doesn't belong in any way to Chabad or something like this. So we have these two types, and now we want to understand, because we had these two types without opening the Zohar and learning about the two types of soldiers. So now we want to whenever we have two concepts that we find a correspondence between them, two sets of ideas, and we make a correspondence between them, the purpose for this is that we learn something. There's this cross pollination. That's one set teaches us something about the other set, and vice versa. So we want to learn something about what does it mean to be a maskil, an intellectual chassid, and what does it mean to be an oived, a working chassid, through these images of the Torah soldier and the tabernacle soldier. So let's look at something very simple. Two differences. We're going to go into two differences between the Torah and the tabernacle, and that would help us understand these two types, and also what it means to be them. Right? As I said, people of course, every maskil has to be also an oived, and every oived has to be a maskil, but some people tend more to be one, right? Each and every one of us can immediately tell, right now as you're listening to me, which type you identify with more. But of course, the whole point is that we want to be both. As we said, the Dagra said that it was learned from the fact that the census was repeated twice. All of them, all the soldiers should be both. But again, we tend to be one more than the other. So two differences between the Torah and the tabernacle. One difference is that the Torah is very steady. It was written, it was put into the Ark of the Covenant, and then it doesn't change. And especially this is true of the written Torah, that the written Torah never changes. The oral Torah keeps expanding and growing, but it's all rooted, so to speak, in the ground, the unchangeable ground of the written Torah. There's something eternal about the Torah, it's unchanging. Tabernacle is very different from this. Tabernacle, when we are moving, as the people of Israel were moving through the desert, each and every station, they had to dismantle the entire tabernacle, carry it with them. These are the soldiers of the tabernacle, and go, and when they found a new place, they would set it up again. So every time, imagine this, every time you're going in the desert, every time you have to take apart, it's a massive thing, and it's it's made up of heavy wooden planks, and they have to take it all apart, and then rebuild it again and again and again, every station in the desert. So what is this difference, this stability versus this constant being on the move, with ups and downs, with rising and falling, and constantly taking apart and rebuilding? What does this tell us about the more intellectual type and the more emotional working type, right? It's a bit of a head and heart here. So the intellectual type, there's something about him that he's sort of above the trials and tribulations of time, the rise and fall of the ebb and tide. He's above all this, and he sees everything, and because he's connected to something very eternal, and this gives him a lot of stability. That's the sort of type he is, and he doesn't get overly excited, or he doesn't collapse, he doesn't lose it whenever things change. Also because, and we see this with all intellectuals, even non-Torah, but there's something deeper in the way it comes about in a Torah student, that things happen in the world, things come and go. It could be a fad, it could be this whole COVID-19 period of time we're going through. It could be a war even that's happening in the world. But when you're connected to something that's more eternal, so philosophers had this also to a certain extent. But there's something different about the Torah, because Torah isn't just a sort of abstract mathematical or philosophical truth. It's the presence of God that's behind everything that's going in the world. And we know that things are being played out in the world, but there's something eternal, and there's someone, not just something, someone to be connected to in a very intimate way through Torah study that keeps you above all this. So if you're more of a maskil, more of an intellectual, you know this. And also if you're not, being more of a maskil, giving more time in your life to Torah study would help you achieve this kind of stability. There's something about this, the fact that we've been having this, we're carrying this Torah with us for millennia, for thousands and thousands of years, and we're studying it each year anew, and we're finding, it's constantly there. There's something about it that gives you a sort of calmness and a sort of, again, this connection to something that things will happen here and there, and things will collapse, then they'll go back to being there where they were. Maybe they won't go back to being exactly the way they were, but it doesn't really matter, because there's this light, there's this thread of light that's going throughout history, your own personal history or biography with whatever is going on in it, universal, the Jewish people's history, the universal history. There's something, this thread of light, the Torah being transmitted from generation to generation, it gives you this sort of calmness and stability. However, as you're descending from the level of the head to the level of the heart, and you're becoming a soldier of the tabernacle, your life is completely different. And again, we all have to be both. So being a soldier of the tabernacle means that every day you have to take apart what you had before, and you have to build it up anew. There's something about being a soldier of the tabernacle that you're very dynamic, and not only that, it doesn't help that you build a whole tabernacle the day before if now you're in a new place. You moved from one place to another place, or the world moved, or things change, or circumstances change. Whatever it is, every day, it's a new day. It's in a very existential way. It's a completely new day. In order to let the light of Hashem reside truly within your heart, to be really connected to your heart, you can't build in any way on the stability of the Torah study you have in your head. That's okay if you just want to be a maskil. But it's not okay to be just a maskil. Because a maskil without being an oived, an intellectual without being a worker, it's like something that doesn't have legs, it's floating. And everyone has to be both. It could be that you're more of a maskil, that's okay. But you have to know the level, you have to have a tabernacle. God wants both the Torah and the tabernacle. So the tabernacle means when you're present in the moment, when you're present in your heart, in what you feel, every day is new, and every day you have to build the tabernacle anew, as if it never happened before. And the maskil finds it very weird, because the maskil says, but we did this yesterday, why do it again? We went through this, we talked about this. Haven't we talked about this yesterday? Haven't we had the same conversation just a week ago or a year ago? Why do we have to go back to the same subject? Because that's what happens when you're thinking just intellectually. And when you're thinking it's about something intellectually, you learn it, and then it's there, and you don't have to go back to it, maybe to repeat it just to memorize, but you don't have to re-experience it or see it in a new light. But if you're in Oived, it's totally different. Every day is new, your heart changes, the colors change of the world, the landscape, your own emotional landscape. And that's something you have to be very much connected to the pulse of the times. And this famous joke about this wife who tells her husband, you haven't told me you love me in such a long time. And so the husband tells her, I told you once, and it didn't change ever since then. So when it changes, I'll update you. Why do you need to hear it every day? Why? Because my heart is reborn every day. This is why. And why do we have to pray every day? Because when you're connected to your heart, you're connected to the fact that it lives in you and it's born in you every day. So that's one major difference between the head and the heart, and the intellectual level and of the maskil and the emotional level of the oived. Second big difference is the fact that the Torah is for all, whereas the work of the tabernacle is just for there's a hierarchy. There's the high priest, and that it was doing things that other priests aren't doing, and then there are the priests, and then there are the Levites, and then you have the rest of Israel. And of course, then you have also non-Jews coming in the future to the future tabernacle, the temple, and they have their role also, but it's very different. And even within the people of Israel, one phrase that appears 3 times in our parasha is Hazar Hakarev Yumat, the foreigner who approaches the work of the priests or the Levites and is not allowed, because it's only their work. A foreigner who comes close, who tries to approximate this kind of work, is to be killed. It's not his thing. It's someone else's thing. Each one has their own role, and you have to identify your role. Torah is very different. Torah, everyone can study Torah. Rabbi Meir in the Talmud even said that a non-Jew studying Torah can reach incredible levels. So Torah is really open for everyone. That's the basis of it. And with the tabernacle is limited. Not only that, but the way the people of Israel would place their tents, would park every time in every station. It would be centered around the tabernacle. So you had, again, hierarchies of proximity, of people closer and less close. So again, what does this mean? What does this tell us about the maskil and the oived? It tells us that the maskil isn't just the good maskil. He isn't studying just for himself. He's studying for everyone. He teaches. He wants everyone to learn. But more than that, it tells us that when you're studying, it's not connected to your personality type, to who you are, and saying this part I like more and this part I like less, and I feel this part of the Torah belongs to me and this part of the Torah doesn't belong to me. That's not a good way of studying. The Torah belongs to everyone and also to every part of you. And so when you're studying, you have to study it in a way that, you're putting your own personality types and issues aside. It doesn't matter who you are. You want to study this amazing orchard of texts, orchard of divine wisdom, that's something very high and universal. And even if it doesn't apply to you personally, it's still a divine truth that applies to someone, somewhere, sometimes. Of course, the Baal Shem Tov taught us that really everything in the Torah ultimately applies also to your own particular time and place and personality type. But that's not how you start studying it. You start studying it by trying to understand God. It's not about you. It's about God's word, God's wisdom. And later on, actually, when you're connecting the maskil within you to the oived within you, the oived is very much connected to his own particular personality type, then it also affects the way you study Torah. But as you're studying it, you're putting yourself aside, and it's something universal. It's this truth that's there, and you want to be immersed in it. However, when you're changing roles and you become a soldier of the tabernacle, it's very different. The question is, am I a Kohen, a priest? Am I a Levite? Am I in Israel? Am I a Kohen Gadol? Am I a Jew or a non-Jew? And this changes and gives you different roles, and it gives you, and also not just a priest or a Levite. Who am I in particular? Which tribe, so to speak, spiritual tribe do I belong to? Because the Levites are a tribe, so that puts in the variable of which tribe you belong to into the equation. So which spiritual tribe do I belong to? Which type am I? Which particular person am I? Because the inner work that you're turning your heart into a tabernacle is extremely individual. It's very, very unique. And here, your uniqueness, your personality, your own likes and dislikes, and your own tendencies become an extremely important part of the kind of work you're doing, because it has to be your own tabernacle. The Torah is everyone's Torah. It's one truth, and we want to be immersed in it and learn it and expand our minds. But going into our hearts, who I am, my own particular issues, it's not philosophical that there's this ethical truth or this attribute is a good attribute to have or whatever. That's very estranged, And even this phrase that we used, Hazara Karev Yumat, the opposite of being a zal, a stranger, a foreigner, is being akin to something. So the idea is that I want to work on the tabernacle because it connects to me personally. I'm not a stranger to it. It's not a stranger to me. If I feel that something is strange, I'm estranged to it. It's not my own work. It's not my thing in the world. Then I don't have to do it. But I have to build a tabernacle in my own heart. And here I'm not a stranger. And everyone else is a stranger regarding the tabernacle that I have to build. They can't come close to it, right? Hazara Karev Yomad is you can't approach the work of the Levites and priests because it doesn't belong to you. So in a way, this is a work that's so intimate, so personal, so unique that no one can approach it If they approach it, they can die. Why can they die? They die because they try and touch something, a certain light, a certain presence that's not theirs. And neither can I approach their own inner tabernacle. Maybe I can receive light and sustenance and something that comes out of their tabernacle, because the tabernacle affects everyone. But it's not mine to approach. It's their own tabernacle that they're working on, and then they're going to, something will come out of it. Their fruit, their livelihood, their whatever they're giving to the world will come out of it. So these are the two types of soldiers that the Zohar is talking about in our parasha. It's hinted at by the two censuses, and we can absolutely and should identify if we ourselves are more of a Torah soldier or more of a tabernacle soldier. But ultimately, we have to have this inter-inclusion within us. If we take the two words, Torah and Mishkan, Torah and tabernacle, the acronym that they create is TAM. TAM means whole, complete. If you want to be whole, you want to be a complete soldier, someone who is wholeheartedly and wholeheadedly serving God, then you have to find within yourself these two levels. You want to have the stability and the universality of Torah wisdom, and you want to have the dynamic, living from day to day, re-experiencing your heart and your life and your own very unique way on the level of your own personal heart, turning it into a tabernacle for God. So thank you very much, and may you have a Shabbat Shalom, and I will see you next week.